Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. I grew up in the mid-80s and early 90s, and some would argue that I haven't really grown up much since then. But this meant that I was playing games when they were mere 2D things made of sprites and weren't always the most complicated things out there. It's no surprise then that I have a real soft spot for 2D games and some awesome pixel art. Well, recently I've been scratching that itch and checking out some of the more recent 2D games that are being made these days, or over the past few years at least. And thankfully there seems to be a real interest and market for games like this in the retro style, and I for one am all for it. So in this video I'm going to show you some of the ones that I've been playing. Simple. Now how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button and we take a look at some games. Let's start with some games in the 8-bit looking era. Here is Oniken being shown on my sexy Steam Deck, as with all of these games. It's the year 20XX and the world has been destroyed after a massive war, and some evil bastards have taken over using some cybernetic warriors that will kill anyone trying to stand up to them. However, there is one man that can stop them, Zaku, which is who you play as conveniently. Not Oniken like I originally assumed, that's the name of the evil army. Anyway, the gameplay here is your classic 2D action adventure. You have to make your way through 6 levels that are packed with enemies, secrets, and of course plenty of platforming. Your goal in each level is just to get to the end, where you'll fight the boss. The game does mix things up though, and every now and then you'll get to ride a speeder bike and have to even shoot enemies. These levels are auto-scrollers and you'll need to avoid obstacles and shoot boxes for power-ups. Of course, deal with any enemies that you see that they give you grief, and I especially like the robot polar bear. You have a sword as your main weapon. It feels good to use and is quick and pretty powerful. Enemies can take a few hits though, which don't always flinch as well when you're hitting them, so do be careful. There's power-ups you can collect that give your sword more power, and this makes it fire a small energy blast and basically gives you a longer reach. As well as that, you can find grenades, which are your secondary weapon and can be used by pressing up and attack. Now, I would have preferred it to have its own dedicated button, but as this is a throwback to when controllers didn't have any spare buttons, I suppose it's okay. The enemies themselves come in a few varieties, quite a lot in fact. They're basically all robots or machines of some sort, and there's some nice designs in here. The bosses are also really cool. They're all pretty large and very tough. You'll need to figure out their patterns if you want to stand a chance. The levels themselves are also tough. This is not an easy game. There's plenty of platforming for you to do here. Visually, it looks great. It's presented as an 8-bit style, but of course couldn't really be done on an 8-bit system, I don't think. The sprite work is excellent and the retro feel is spot on. There's a few filters you can play around with as well for the sound and visual to take away some of the blurring and CRT filters if you want to, but I like how it looks. Overall, it's a really fun game that kept me coming back again and again. I've only got one level left to go, so I will be going back to finish it shortly. Another one in the 8-bit style is Prison City. The story here is that Detroit has been turned into a giant prison. Basically, it's pretty much the same as the story of Batman Arkham City, though instead of playing as Batman, you're Hal Bruiser, who is called out of retirement to take down the militaristic robot wardens that have gone crazy in the city and are basically now just evil. So you grab your boomerang chakram things and take the train to the city to infiltrate from within. I really like the level design here. This is not a game that just wants you to go from left to right. The levels here are quite large with a few different paths you can take, and you need to explore pretty much everywhere in them to find keycards to open doors or to meet up with the other people from the Resistance who will help you in some way, usually by giving you an item or keycard. Oh, and one of your contacts is a dolphin, which is awesome. Basically, you always need to find the exit door, you just need to have the key to open it. One of the main mechanics here is hanging onto pipes and things and shimmying across. This is actually a little bit of a pain, as you have to hold up on the controller to grab onto anything, which caused me a lot of deaths as I'd forget in the middle of a big battle, especially against some of the bosses. You don't have unlimited lives, but thankfully there are checkpoints and you never really go back too far and you can get your progress saved. What I really like is that every level has its own unique enemies. Some are shared between levels, but most aren't, and the ones that are kind of expected. The bad guys here all reflect the theme of the stage that they're on usually, so for example the sports stadium has enemies that are dressed as American football players and so on. After the opening train stage you can actually choose the order that you complete the levels in, which is nice. As far as I can tell though, there's no real advantage as to what order you play the levels in. You don't get any new powers or anything. Exploring is useful though, and it will help you find secret areas with hard to reach power-ups that give you stronger attacks or temporary invincibility, but nothing that lasts permanently. These things are very handy against the bosses though. And speaking of attacking, it's pretty good actually. You have a chakram that you throw. There's a power bar in the top left, and the higher that is, the more damage you'll do. So basically, you can either hammer the attack button for multiple weak attacks, or you can be more patient and do fewer, stronger attacks. It is quite noticeable against bosses, where a single full power hit takes off a bar of their health, whereas if you spam it, it can take 7 or 8 hits. This is another game that is very challenging. The levels are pretty damn large actually, with some very tricky platforming sections and plenty of deadly enemies. But I do think it's a fair challenge. The main issue for me was just grabbing onto ledges, but it's still perfectly playable, as the controls are actually pretty damn good. As is the music. I really like the tunes here, and they really get you into the 80s mood. Visually, it looks great too. I think it's hard for the 8-bit styles made nowadays not to look good, unless the artists are just awful, but they were definitely good here, especially on the boss designs, and I like the variety in levels as well. It's great. This is another really fun game that I recommend checking out. Moving on to more 16-bit territory now, though it probably would really be 32-bit era. Here is Battle Princess Madelyn. This is a really cool action platform game that is in no bad way a heavy homage to the Ghouls and Ghosts games. You are Madelyn, a knight in training, and your village is the target of an evil wizard who's raised an army of the undead and is terrorising your village, so naturally it's up to you to go stop the git. Also, he killed your dog, so he deserves to die. Interestingly, you get 2 options for gameplay here. There's arcade mode and story mode. If you choose arcade mode, the game plays like a traditional side-scrolling action game where your mission is to go from left to right and sometimes up and down, fighting off enemies and tackling some precarious platforming, before you get to a huge boss that you need to kick in the nuts. Beat the boss and it's on to the next level, until you finally beat the wizard. If you choose the story mode, it's actually more of a Metroidvania, where you start in your village and have to talk to some of the townsfolk who will give you additional quests to complete, like finding items or rescuing people in the levels. Now, the levels you play are basically the same in every mode, but in story mode it's one large open map rather than being stage-based. You'll still need to traverse the stages and fight the bosses, but you'll also need to find items and new abilities to help you progress, like needing the double jump boots to reach a new area and so on. I really like this. And you've got a few weapons in the game as well. You start off with a staff javelin-y thing, and you can get axes, swords, knives, fireballs and so on. All of these are projectile weapons that you throw. In arcade mode, you just use the most recent one that you picked up, but in story mode you have a proper inventory and you can switch between weapons and items whenever you need to. You'll also find items that can be traded with the townspeople to get new weapons or armour upgrades. It's very enjoyable. But it's definitely not easy. In fact, it's bloody hard. There are enemies everywhere, and even though you can take a couple of hits, you will die a lot. The knockback here is pretty severe, so a lot of the time when I died, it was because I got hit and fell backwards into a bottomless pit, which is kind of annoying. The enemies look great though, as do all the graphics. There's plenty of skeletons, zombies, ghouls, evil plants and animals to kill. And as always in games like this, the bosses are huge and look great with patterns you need to learn. To help you, you also have a ghost of your dog who was murdered by the wizard. Killing enemies gives you power for him, and once the power meter is full, you can hold down the attack button to charge it up, and then the ghost will attack, usually killing most enemies in just a single hit. As you progress, you get different attacks and abilities for the dog, which is cool. I had a lot of fun with this game, though I did find it frustratingly hard in points. I have a feeling this may not be for everyone due to some difficulty and bullshittery, usually with the knockback, but if you do like a challenge, specifically the sort that Ghouls and Ghosts dishes out, then you'll probably have a very good time with this one, and I do recommend playing it. Blazing Chrome is one of many shooters that try to capture the feel of the 16-bit run-and-gun games like Contra, and thankfully it does it pretty damn well. It's your classic alien invasion story in a post-apocalyptic world. Let's be honest, the story doesn't really matter here, but there's one if you can be bothered to read it. There are 6 levels to play through, some of which you can choose the order of at the start of the game, but the last couple you do need to have unlocked before you can play them, and they'll let you see the enemy base. For the most part, you'll be running to the right, armed to the teeth, and taking on hundreds of enemies on every level before, you guessed it, fighting a huge boss at the end of the level. You can choose from 2 characters, though they do play the same, so it's purely cosmetic, though there are actually a few you can unlock which do actually play a little differently. You start out with a machine gun that has unlimited ammo. In fact, every weapon has unlimited ammo. There's only 4 in total though, which is a little bit of a shame. You get a grenade which has a slow rate of fire but is really powerful, a laser ball flamethrower kind of thing which has a great rate of fire and does good damage but has a short range. There's a laser which is powerful but fires slowly and needs to be charged ideally for maximum damage. Interestingly, there's no spread gun. As well as these guns though, you also have support drones, depending on the difficulty that you choose. These are fun to use and give you nice boosts. One is an attack drone and fires where and when you do. There's one that's a shield that lets you take 3 extra hits before it's destroyed. One is a speed up that makes you move faster and even double jump. You can only have 1 drone at a time though, but when you collect one, if you don't want it, you can just grab back the old one, which is handy. And as is seemingly mandatory in these games, there's a few stages where you're on a future hoverbike thing. These are fun bits, and the stages do auto-scroll. You even get to ride in a few mechs during the course of the game, and it's a nice touch and helps keep things fresh. And also towards the end of the game, there's a few levels that are played in a third-person perspective. It's cool. The action here is fast-paced and frantic, and most importantly, fun. You can only take 1 hit here if you don't have a drone, so it's not easy. But it's definitely a fair challenge. You get a lot of enemies coming at you almost all the time, but you're always properly equipped. You'll keep the weapons that you pick up and you can switch between them, but you will lose the one that you're using when you die. The game looks awesome with a perfect retro look. The enemy designs are fantastic and the bosses are great. And as you'd expect, it controls really well as well, and pretty much all of the deaths are going to be your fault. If you're into some retro run and guns, then I'd say this is a must-have, especially if you've got a friend for some awesome co-op goodness. Another excellent run and gun is Iron Meat. You'll never believe it, but aliens have turned up again. This time though, they are the sort that can infect pretty much anything and everyone. This means you'll be battling former soldiers that are now covered in parasitic aliens, as well as a whole load of machines, as the new threat can also take over metal objects, hence the name Iron Meat. Now, this definitely lends itself to some really awesome and unique enemies and bosses. Gameplay wise, you kinda know what to expect here, but in a good way. It's a classic Contra style run and gun. You go from left to right battling hordes of enemies until you get to the boss at the end of the stage. The levels here are pretty large. In fact, there were times when I thought some of them maybe were dangerously close to being a bit too long. But still, you'll go through forests, cities, science labs and so on. There's a ton of bad guys in the levels, and as mentioned, they all look really cool, whether they're former humans or maybe a tank that's been corrupted and is now half machine, half gross organism. And yes, I had to re-record that 3 times because I kept saying orgasm. What's cool is there's a bit of interactivity in the levels from time to time as well. For example, you might see a door with enemies pouring out, so you want to blow it up so they stop coming. Or maybe there's a heavy looking slab of concrete in the top of the screen. Shoot it, because it might just come loose and crush the enemies below. These sorts of little touches are always really nice. There's a few weapons you can get here as well, and you can carry 2 at a time, which is a bit of a shame. I would have liked more. You start with the usual weak rifle that isn't actually that bad to use. As well as this, you find a heavy machine gun, a wave blasting shooty thingy, a laser gun and a spread gun. All the weapons here are pretty good and I didn't mind which ones I had really. You do have to be careful though. If you have a loadout that you like and you pick up a different weapon, you can't get the old ones back and it will replace the one that you're holding. What I do like though is that collecting multiple of the same weapon will power them up, making them do more damage or fire bigger shots, that sort of thing. Something that really has to get a shout out here are the bosses, which are just awesome. They're always huge screen-filling monsters that are part machine. There's a tank, a train, a helicopter and so on. They all look brilliant and the designs on everything are just so cool. In fact, the graphics in general are just excellent. I love the art style and the animation is great. There's so much detail and little things going on in the background and everything like that. There's a lot of blood and guts here as well, and blowing enemies to bits is just so much fun. Combine this with some super responsive controls and a very fair difficulty, and there's not really a lot to complain about. The music is also really good, with a metal soundtrack that plays throughout. Though I do have to say that I did turn the music down at one point because there was only so much metal I could have blasting straight into my ears. Don't get me wrong, I love it, it just felt a bit relentless at times and I just needed a little break. But still, this game is freaking awesome and I really recommend everyone give this a try. Speedollama is another run and gun, but this one is slightly different. Here you choose from a few different commando llamas that are fighting against the alpaca bastards and their animal minion mates. There is a largely ignorable story, which is basically that alpacas are bastards, so you need to sort them out. This is done through a series of small, randomly generated levels. Basically, you're put in a stage which has a time limit, and on every level you need to collect a certain number of objects in order to activate a teleporter to move on to the next stage. So what you want to do is explore the level and find everything, obviously. The levels are quite large, and there's plenty of enemies for you to fight. Various types of alpaca armed with guns, rockets, tanks and more are out to get you, and there's also various other bits of wildlife on their side. Basically, anything you see is an enemy or an item, so either kill or collect as much as you can. You get a few weapons. You start out with a machine gun as standard, but you can find a rocket launcher, flamethrower, laser and more. The weapons you find in levels all have limited ammo though. There's also grenades you get which are good for screen clearing. Killing enemies is really fun though, mainly because they explode in a torrent of cartoon gore and it's really fun to watch. The game really doesn't take itself seriously at all, which is always a good thing. It's also very fast paced. As the game name hints at, you run at a really fast speed, even with the slowest character, and the game is essentially a time trial collectathon. Enemies are just obstacles. You can double jump, and also if you jump and then shoot down at the right time, you can get yourself an even more height on your jump. You'll need to do this to get through some of the levels, so start practicing as soon as you can. Thankfully here you can pull up a map at any point to see where you haven't explored, so you can find the items you need. I would have preferred it if the map was always on the screen, but I guess there is a reason it isn't. Killing enemies gets you money, and you can also just find it laying around in the levels. You can use this between stages to buy upgrades. There's one for more health, better weapons, more time, more speed, and there's one that lets you move around while the map is up. You can have 3 items equipped per level, and you can swap them around between levels as well, which is handy. Eventually you'll fight a boss, and these are all large and fun to fight. The worlds do have quite a few levels in them, and I will say that I did start to get a little bored after about half an hour, as the game is pretty repetitive, and I've never really been a big fan of games like this that need you to run around and collect a certain number of items before you can exit the stage. They give me horrific flashbacks of some of the old 16-bit games like Home Improvement on the SNES, though this game is infinitely better than that one. It does look great with some nice pixel art, and I do like the humour that they've thrown in, and I think the announcer might be the same one they used in Broforce, which is always good. Overall, this is still a good game, but for me it's one that I'd play in small bursts, and I would do a few levels at a time. It's also a shame that it's single player only. This would have been much more fun to explore with friends. Oh well. And finally for today, here is 1980X. This is a really great story-driven coming-of-age game about a girl growing up in the 80s who's a bit of an outcast. She finds an arcade one night, and the game tells the story of how it all happened and how it introduced her to people like her and let her escape reality when she needed it. You might not believe me by the footage that that's what the game is about, but it's true. The game features some quite long cutscenes between the levels, all of which are based on classic arcade games. The story sections are really well done, and I don't know if it's because I can relate, but I just found them quite poignant. Then, once you had the exposition all out of the way, you basically play one of the arcade games that the girl was playing growing up. The games are clear homages to arcade favourites. There's Beating Heart, which is basically a Streets of Rage clone, where you take to the streets and fight dozens of thugs. Then there's Out of the Void, a space shooter kind of like R-Type or Gradius, where you're shooting down enemy ships while powering up your ship. Next is the Runaway, an outrun style racer where you're against the clock driving down some long streets avoiding traffic. Then there's Shadow Play, where you're a ninja wearing a dog mask. It's an auto-scroller where you have to dodge attacks and slash enemies with your sword. And the last one is a first-person dungeon crawler where you have to battle enemies and level up until you defeat 3 dragons. Now, I won't go into detail on all of the games individually, because they are all deliberately simplified versions of the style they're representing, and you already know how they play. And what's interesting is that you can't actually lose any of them. Well, technically you can, as you can die and you might have to restart the level, but there's no actual end. It's all part of the story, and while a couple of the games do need you to beat a boss, some will just sort of finish randomly at some random point, usually with a voiceover of the girl explaining why she liked the game and how it's affected her personally. It's actually a really nice touch, and I found it really engaging. You may also notice that the game titles are actually related to the emotions of the girl. It's all done with some fantastic pixel art, the games all look and animate really well with plenty of detail everywhere, and the cutscenes between games also look great with some fantastic scenes and some very well done voiceover. And I really have to mention the music, which is just outstanding. It's got a brilliant synthwave soundtrack that just makes everything tie together so well. It's got a real 80s feel to it, and I'm not ashamed to say that I've been listening to it on Spotify for the last week or so, pretty much on repeat. So, as you may have guessed, I really love this game. I feel like I'm exactly the audience for it, but I would really encourage everyone to check it out. The actual games you play are simple, but the overall experience is really good. The only downside really is that it's very short. You can beat it the first time you play it in really about an hour, maybe an hour and a half at the most, but it is more of an interactive story than anything, and it's one that I really enjoyed. So there you go, a bunch of modern-ish retro games that you might want to check out. I love these games, so of course let me know others that I should check out, and they may appear if I do a part 2 of this subject. On screen now you can see where you can follow me, so why not do so? I've got loads of great content for everyone to enjoy. And now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.